Welcome once again to Lehto's Law. Here's Steve Lehto.
I've got a story here that was sent to me by a lot of people, and everywhere I turned, I bumped into it on the internet as well. So I thought, well, I finally got to do a story about it and kind of just cover this because a grandmother got hundreds of false tickets due to Star Trek vanity plates. Turns out she had one at one point in time, but she turned it in and got rid of it. And ever since then, she kept getting tickets based on her license plate showing up all over the place, including in other countries, and not just linked to speeding and bridge tolls, but also to actual crimes. So it's a weird story, but as you might guess, novelty plates are fairly easy to come by, and that is something you'd think that the people in charge, i.e. the government, would know and would find ways to work around. So this from MSN.com. Jonathan Edwards wrote this. The woman surrendered her Star Trek-themed license plate back in 2020. But she didn't realize it would still haunt her for years, sparking hundreds of incorrect traffic violations. Accused she was of these things, and it thrust her into a seemingly never-ending bureaucratic nightmare with DMV officials. She's 75 years old now. She knew the plate was a Star Trek reference because her husband, who's passed now, was into that, and he'd gotten the license plate years earlier that says NCC 1701. And those, of course, are the numbers on the top of the Enterprise as it used to go by the camera in outer space. So she now lives on Long Island, and she was upset that the New York State Department of Motor Vehicles wouldn't help her. And she says this experience was infuriating and soul-crushing, and she says she got to run around for years. She also criticized companies that sell fake personalized license plates that authorities can mistake as authentic. She says, "They have all tortured me for 4 years. I just want to cry. It's such a mess." Over the past 4 years, she's received hundreds of traffic citations from all over the U.S. and beyond. Now, she not only turned in that plate in 2020, she stopped driving in 2020. She said she spent nearly every day since then explaining to authorities all over the place that she no longer has the plates, and then she has to prove that to them by giving them a copy of the New York DMV document showing that she surrendered the plates. The plates were destroyed. A spokesperson for the DMV in New York said that there's no such thing as de-linking a customer's information from a plate once it's registered to them. It can't be done. Turns out it can be, but DMV has gone above and beyond to assist this woman for the past 4 years, and our records have always made it clear that her plates were surrendered. We share in her frustration and believe it should be directed to the tolling and billing entities who have victimized her with their inability, or worse yet, unwillingness, to properly ensure they're billing the correct individual. But if somebody in another state takes a photograph of a car with a license plate that says NCC 1701 and they think it's a New York plate, how do they get her information again? Turns out they are getting it from the New York DMV, or at least they were. Now, her husband had gotten those plates back in 1978. This guy was way ahead of the curve on Star Trek. Because in 78, as you can imagine, the universe of Star Trek was not as big as it is now. So the two of them got married in the 80s, and in 1998 transferred the plates to her car, but they both drove the car. They were on that car for more than 2 decades, but then they divorced, and then in 2020, she decided to get a new car to replace the Maxima that's falling apart after 22 years. So never having been a Trekkie herself and having grown tired of paying extra for personalized plates, she surrendered the plates and destroyed them, and somewhere along the line, she stopped driving altogether. So in August, she got a notice from officials in Vernon, New York, 300 miles away, and she'd never been there, so she called them to say, "Hey, look, I don't have these plates anymore," and they dropped the charges. So she thought, well, okay, it's a false alarm. Then she got a ticket in the Bronx for speeding and had to call again. Over the coming months and years, notices about tickets appeared from more than a dozen states, including Massachusetts, Florida, and Washington State. In 2 cases, authorities in Canada and Ohio said they had evidence that the plate had been on a vehicle used in robberies. So she continued fighting these one at a time as they popped up. She always managed to get the tickets dismissed, but it was taking a lot of work on her part. She spent hours on the phone, waiting on hold, and explaining herself yet again. She had to go through printer paper and books of stamps, sending documentation around the country. She said she also tried to cut off the confusion at the source by contacting the New York State DMV. And they told her that her name and address were still linked to that plate. So agencies with photos showing fake New York license plates with NCC 1701, presumably some of them Trekkie fans who were speeding and running red lights, sent violation notices to her with the threat of punishments if she didn't pay. And so the author of this article looked it up, and it turns out that you can go on to Amazon, and for $14, you also can order a license plate that says it is a New York State metal stamped license plate that reads NCC 1701. So she had at one point in time 200 outstanding violations and late fees in New York City alone. DMV couldn't help her. They kept saying that there's only so much we can do. So she contacted News 12, which ran a story about this, and a lawyer based in Long Island named Kenneth Mullins, who is a hero for our times, saw one of the segments, and he contacted her and said, I think I can help you. And so they met. He wrote a letter to the DMV commissioner and the deputy commissioner and general counsel, and within hours, they called him. And when the lawyer suggested that, we can always resolve this with a lawsuit, we can get a court order to make you guys take care of this, they said, I'm paraphrasing, we can fix this. Again, paraphrasing. By the next morning, NCC 1701, if searched, was not linked to her name. Now, the attorney says that while he's appreciative of the help from the DMV, the situation never should have spiraled into years of anguish for the woman or escalated to the attention of the top leadership of the DMV. Someone much lower should have been able to make that fix within weeks, if not days, because somehow they did it in hours, just hours. And certainly it should have happened back in 2020, not now. So he said, it just shows this big bad entity was stepping on this lady for no reason. It took me one phone call. They pushed this lady to her wit's end. So the woman behind this story says, why didn't they do that in 2020 when I surrendered the plate? What would have been so hard about doing that then? And when asked that question, the people at the DMV declined to comment, presumably because it's so painfully obvious now that people wonder, Now, I have one question, and this is the question that I'm going to ask of you. Some states, like Michigan, do not require a front license plate. So it's extremely common to be driving around and see a plate on the front of a car that is not an authentic license plate. Novelty plates run amok in states like Michigan. However, in states that require two plates, you'd think you gotta have a real plate front, real plate back, right? So when these plates are showing up as being on speeding cars or violating tolls or getaway cars for crimes, is that on the rear of the car or the front of the car? Because they don't address that. And I'm surprised if there's that many people driving around with novelty plates as the real plate in their car. Now, don't get me wrong. I know people do it. I've seen videos on YouTube of people pulled over and a cop walks up and goes, that license plate's not real. And they spot that. So if somebody's driving around with a license plate, I'll give an example of the defense plate there. If you don't know, that's sent in to me by a viewer because it was in a movie called Falling Down with Michael Douglas. Okay? But that's not the real plate from the movie. That's not even a real plate. This is a novelty plate that somebody ordered and printed up. But you'll notice it does not have tags on it, for instance. The little stickers that would indicate what year it's for and if it's been paid. So are people in all of these cases putting the plate on the rear of their car, a novelty plate, and driving around? And I've mentioned before, I do not like the automatic things, the cameras, the robots, whatever you want to call them, that photograph a car and mail a ticket. And I've said because, number one, they don't have any discretion. They just do what they do. But number two, it apparently is a problem because they can't distinguish a novelty plate from a real plate. And so when somebody in Texas is photographed with a novelty plate on the back of their car and they go, oh, it's a 75-year-old woman in New York who hasn't driven in 4 years. That would seem to be some kind of red flag. I don't know. And yes, I just made the motion for football a yellow flag, but that's okay. Flags can be any color they want. That should be a warning flag, wouldn't you think? So there's the issue I have, but again, it's not addressed here, and I looked at a bunch of these stories, and no one addressed this if the license plates were in the front, the back, or both. Like I said, I'm in Michigan. We don't have front license plates. We're not required to have them, and when you order plates, you get one plate. You can get extras if you want them, and you got to pay for them, but you only got to put one on your car. And I remember in the years ago, before they allowed you to get away with only one plate, and they required two plates. And I knew guys who didn't like the look of a front license plate, just wouldn't put it on their car. And for instance, I can think of some cars that have got a really, really cool looking front end with an air dam. And although there was a way to mount the plate there, it didn't look good. And I had a brother who had a 71 Trans Am and only had one plate on it. I remember asking about it. He goes, yeah. He goes, but they don't pull you over for it. Now, a cop could, if you wanted to, he could also ticket you for that. But it turns out they weren't enforcing it that harshly, at least not back then. So that's the question I have. Because if it's a front license plate on a car and it gets picked up by some kind of reader, that should be an indication. Yeah, maybe we should focus on the rear license plates. Because people do, from time to time, travel between states. So her story has a good ending. It took a lawyer threatening a lawsuit. And ironically, the lawsuit threat is not as big against a government entity as it is against an individual. Because, of course, they've got a law department. And they could just say, go ahead and sue us. We don't care. But apparently, they stepped up and did the right thing. Presumably because it's not that they're scared of the lawsuit. They're getting kind of bummed out by the attendant publicity. It's making them look really bad. As if a state DMV needs help with that. So, this is from MSN.com. Jonathan Edwards wrote that, presumably not the same one who had the song, but grandmother gets hundreds of false tickets due to the Star Trek vanity plates that she used to have. And of course, they now sell on Amazon. So there you go. Questions or comments, put them below. Let's talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching Lehto's Law. I didn't make it to the gym today. That makes it 5 years in a row.